How is Hazor treated differently than all the other northern cities of Canaan? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Joshua on Walking Through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing Joshua 11, verses 1 to 15. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Joshua chapter 11, verse 1. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Joshua 11, beginning at verse 1. And it came to pass when Jabin, king of Hazor, heard these things, that he sent to Jobab, king of Madon, to the king of Shimron, to the king of Aksaph, to the kings who were from the north in the mountains, in the plains of Chinneroth, in the lowland and the heights of Dor on the west, to the Canaanites in the east and the west, the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Jebusite in the mountains, and the Hivite below Hermon in the land of Mizpah. So they went out, they and all their armies with them, as many peoples as the sand that is on the seashore in multitude, with very many horses and chariots. And when all these kings had met together, they came and camped together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. But the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid because of them, for tomorrow about this time I will deliver all of them slain before Israel. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire." So Joshua and all the people of war with him came against them suddenly by the waters of Merom, and they attacked them. And the Lord delivered them into the hand of Israel, who defeated them and chased them to greater Sidon, to the brook of Mizperoth, and the land of Mizpah eastward. They attacked them until they left none of them remaining. So Joshua did to them as the Lord had told him. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots with fire. Joshua turned back at that time and took Hazor and strung its king with the sword, for Hazor was formerly the head of all these kingdoms. And they struck all the people who were in it with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was none left breathing. Then he burned Hazor with fire. So all the cities of those kings and all their kings Joshua took and struck with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed them, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. But as for the cities that stood on their mounds, Israel burned none of them, except Hazor only, which Joshua burned. And all the spoil of these cities and the livestock the children of Israel took as booty for themselves. But they struck every man with the edge of the sword until they had destroyed them, and they left none breathing. As the Lord had commanded Moses his servant, so Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. Israel, being led now by Joshua, has subdued the southern part of Canaan, what would become most of the land given to the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, Simeon, and Dan. We noted that this took some time, even though chapter 10 made it seem like only a few weeks. It would have taken much longer than that. How much time exactly? We're not exactly sure, though later on in the book we'll discuss an overall time frame. But since God had promised Israel the entire land of Canaan, Israel couldn't be content with southern Canaan. They had to turn north. Chapter 11 begins with Jabin, the king of Hazor, seeing what was done in southern Canaan and deciding to lead an attack against Israel. As seen on our map, Hazor is a major city north of the Sea of Chinneroth, which is what is called in the New Testament the Sea of Galilee. Now, in order to have a chance at winning, Jabin, much like the king of Jerusalem did in chapter 10, gathered together an alliance of neighboring cities. He petitions the king of Shimron and the king of Aksaph, the kings who were in the north in the mountains, as well as the kings who were in the plains and the lowlands south of Chinneroth, as well as kings in the heights of Dor, which borders the Mediterranean on the west. Basically, as our map shows, Jabin, king of Hazor, gathered together practically all the people in Galilee to fight against Israel. Later on in the text, we find out how Jabin was able to do this relatively easily, which is because Hazor was formerly the head of all these kingdoms, and thus this king had quite a bit of influence. But even though these armies were formidable, they would be no match for Israel as long as God was on their side. And of course the Lord was on their side, as he told Joshua to not be afraid, for the Lord would deliver all of them into their hands. Now, before moving on, it should be noted that between Gilgal and where Israel began this battle near the waters of Merom, there are places like Shiloh and Shechem. How come we don't read of places like these or places in the hills of Samaria being conquered? Well, there are two things to consider. First, it could be that the people of these places were taken by Israel back in chapter 8 in a battle we don't have recorded. Remember, Shechem is near Mount Ebal, where Israel was at the end of chapter 8, so it is quite possible that Shechem was already under Israel's control. But the second thing to consider is that some of the places on the way from Ai to the north, Israel didn't conquer. There are going to be places in the Jezreel Valley that were left unconquered, and other places as well. So it is quite possible that these battles are left out because these battles either didn't take place or because Israel lost those battles, for the Lord wasn't with them. That will find Israel not conquering all the peoples was not the fault of God. It was the fault of Israel, one that will plague them throughout their history up to the Babylonian conquest. The battles fought here in Joshua 11 with the armies gathered by the king of Hazor was a success. Israel chased these peoples in battle to the north and to the east until none of them remained. Joshua also took the king of Hazor and killed him with the sword and burned down the city of Hazor along with killing everyone in the city. Hazor in the north was thus treated much like Jericho and Ai. Why were they treated differently, especially considering we don't read of Israel burning any city in South Canaan to the ground? Well, remember, Hazor was a major city and the one that instigated this whole battle, so perhaps Joshua was trying to ensure that it wouldn't have the power to do so again. Whatever the case, Hazor was destroyed and Israel took control of much of northern Canaan, with some exceptions that we'll discuss in future lessons. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Joshua chapter 11, verses 16 to 23, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.